Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest Define Tomorrow podcast. Today's podcast is all around vSphere 8 and VMware Explore, which happened in Barcelona last month. I'd like to bring on board my fellow co-host for this podcast. I've got Kam Panasar.
Hello.
And I've got John May.
Hi there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much both for joining me. I think it's fair to say that vSphere has been changing, evolving over the last few years, and it's probably gone from a technology where we all used to wait for the latest and greatest release to deliver better performance to our VMs, amazing new features. We all remember when things like vMotion was released for the first time and seeing it in action. But we're now in this new hybrid world where workloads are either in place in the cloud or on premises. Of course, vSphere can run in the cloud or on premises. And some of those workloads that people are running on premises or indeed the cloud are more complex than ever before, driven by AI or maybe graphical user interfaces and a plethora of other complexities. So it's fair to say vSphere 8 is VMware's latest iteration of their hypervisor, allowing people to do more with their platform than ever possibly before. So let's kind of dig into those details a little bit, and then we will then follow up with looking a little bit into VMware Explore, the direction VMware is going on, and what could be next for VMware. So let's get started. Before we dig into the features, if you had to kind of summarize your thoughts on the announcements, what would those thoughts be? So Kam, over to you first.
Yeah, so from my perspective, it was great to see the VMware experience back. I know it's been rebranded as VMware Explore now. It's hard for me not to say VMworld, but certainly seeing it back and everyone pumped up for seeing what's coming new in the product. And from my perspective, looking in, I think it's been more of an iterative from the outside point of view in terms of the changes, but under the hood, they've made quite a few changes to the product to really make it align to that cloud journey that people are going on, but knowing that there's still quite a dependency, if you want to call it that, or operating model around the hybrid, data centers at the moment.
And John, how about you? Any kind of high-level thoughts about digging into sort of individual features at this point?
Very much a case of, like Cam said, it's very much an iterative sort of development cycle again. I think that they've changed a few things under the hood. I think they've brought in a few new features they want to bring forward and sort of new technologies that are going to be coming through in the future. So yeah, it's interesting.
I think from my perspective, I think what you will think about this release will very much depend on who you are and what you're trying to do. vSphere used to be everything to everybody. Everybody was doing one thing, and that was moving physical servers to virtual servers. And largely irrespective of who you were, whether you were a large enterprise or even a very small business, those servers all looked pretty much the same. They would just have more memory in them or more CPU in them. So when things like DRS came out and the Enterprise Plus functionality as it was back in the day, if you were a small enough business with enough virtual machines to warrant those features, you could get quite excited about that and they were still quite relevant to you. I think we're now at that kind of era of technology, of IT, where things are changing a little bit. People are doing things in different way. Virtualization isn't the only option available to people, or at least hypervisor-led, on-premises-led virtualization isn't the only option to people. And I think some people, certainly in the mid-market, and that's where a lot of the customers I interact with will look at this update and go, okay, there's some things have changed here, but maybe some of these features aren't as relevant to me as maybe things like vSphere 5 and vSphere 6 when those initially came out. So I'd imagine some people might be looking into why do this update? Why is this update important to me? So I think that's something we should get to in a moment. Kam, I'll come to you first. What new features stood out to you? Or give us one, and then we'll go over to John for the next one.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first headline thing they announced was the support around DPUs, which are the processing units, which are effectively they're trying to now leverage to offload the ESXi running, shall we say, and integration with the network piece. I think the previous, or the product name in terms of the project, was Monterey, in terms of creating the smart NIC architecture. And so that's now come to fruition, where you can effectively regain some of those resources on the compute platform and use it for real workloads for the VMs. And yet, from a management perspective, they haven't disconnected that. So when it comes to the upgrade process, you're having to do two sets of upgrades. intelligently aware of how to place that VMware ESXi workload and how to manage it from a life cycle point of view. So that's certainly a new feature in version 8 of vSphere.
I don't know, John, have you got any thoughts on the DPU before I reflect on it at all?
I think it's more of a case of that will be, especially on the larger environments, it'll be very interesting to see how that sort of develops. It's still relatively new sort of technology and features coming through. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that's really sort of integrated into the overall systems and actually how that sort of actually comes out the other side, so to speak, and especially in sort of smaller environments. It's going to sort of speed up certain things, such as data transport and storage traffic, but it'll be interesting to see how that sort of really sort of progresses as now it's available.
I think if you're running workloads that are CPU intensive and you're trying to get the most bang for your buck and trying to deliver as many VMs on the least amount of hardware possible, then it could be particularly interesting. And I think also with things like licensing, if you're able to get more on less, you're probably able to save money on various licensing costs across different product lines. I suppose to think of some of our customers and where this might be able to be used is we've got a number of customers that are running VMware Horizon that have got graphics intensive workloads. So they're already utilizing the NVIDIA GPUs and well, not offloading because it's a different type of processing unit, but utilizing the GPU so the CPU doesn't need to be dealing with that part of it. But equally, with some of the software that we see people using for graphics intensive workloads, they're also CPU intensive as well as being GPU intensive. So I suppose if you're able to offload the networking stack and other things like the DPUs are promising to be able to do, that will allow you to really maximize the use of those CPUs. And I suppose, Cam, to your point, what really was impressive to me is ultimately multiple versions of ESXi are running in one server, but they've made it so easy to manage and maintain, and it doesn't look like you're running 2-3 different hosts on a single server, does it?
Yeah, no, not at all. But they've kind of taken that a bit further with the AI and machine learning journey as well, and the fact that you can now create device groups to actually pair the GPUs and the NICs together to almost act as one entity. So they're definitely understanding that the workload nature in the data center is changing. That from a customer perspective, regardless of the vertical you're in, there is some, I could say, requirement to go down that analytical route where you need that grunt. So certainly bringing that feature in where you can leverage the resources of the ESXi estate in one go, just through one device group, is certainly very helpful rather than having to manage them as separate entities in terms of here's a GPU by itself, here's a NIC by itself, and not being able to leverage the speed benefits of grouping those items together.
I think what does this say? Data is the new oil kind of thing, that you've got to unorganized data is no valuable to anyone. You've got to be able to analyze it. You've got to be able to see patterns inside of it. So I think more and more people are looking at how they can do that. Obviously, some of our customers, probably a majority, are looking to cloud services that will do that. But those cloud services have got to run somewhere. And then you've got other customers, maybe like universities that we've worked with and things like that in the past, that are probably actually trying to be making these algorithms and using those to solve the world's biggest challenges and world's biggest problems. So I think VMware has such a wide appeal. I think DPUs will have a limited wow factor to some customers, and maybe actually it just becomes a native part of a design and build process that is included there. Obviously, we're waiting for latest generations of CPUs and systems to come at some point in the future. But maybe we'll start to see kind of packaged up designs where DPUs are included as standard in ESXi hosts.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we'll start to see them come more into the fore as, people adopt them, I guess, because they're very much the starting point right now, and the people are on the journey. But we also know more from a customer point of view when they're planning those hardware refreshes, knowing that there's capabilities available to them is an important thing to consider. And also from sort of a generational point of view, when you look at it from a service perspective, it's making sure that you're sort of looking at the right type of architecture going forward. So in the past, the sort of the vSphere stuff was quite good in terms of the hardware compatibility. But I think from a Dell perspective, we're now looking at 13th generation and above for the vSphere 8 to really leverage it.
Yes, indeed. So John, what's the next feature you want to talk about?
I suppose I think it's interesting to find the CPU. I mean, it's from the CPU point of view, it's really changing that sort of idea on the DPU side of it again. That's becoming more of a resource as opposed to, or a pool of resources as opposed to being the sort of core that everything has to go through. So it's changing that mindset. Next feature, I mean, suppose there's the lifecycle management we've spoken about. They're depreciating some of that, some degree, or that's in the next version. I think 8's going to be the last version that currently has the current lifecycle manager.
I think is it update manager? I think
Sorry, update manager. Yes.
Yeah, bringing end of life.
Yeah. So from the perspective of update manager, 8 is the last version you can actually use it. But the reasons why they're trying to transfer you, shall we say, to the new way of doing things with the lifecycle manager are really all focused around that ease of management piece, where they're trying to allow you to stage the updates to the ESXi environment so that when you want to patch it, they're already downloaded to the ESXi components themselves, and you don't have that worry, shall we say, that it's trying to do an update and download at the same time. And then also one of the other flexibility options in there is around the parallel running. So normally you do one by one, but now you can batch it as an administrator how you'd want to batch it. Say maybe I'll do 2 of the cluster at a time, maybe I'll do 3, or however many are in your cluster that you're willing to take the outage on. So, it's kind of trying to streamline that and simplify that mode of operation. So they're kind of giving us that cutover point in terms of saying, yes, you can do it this way, but now we'd like you to do it that way. And I think it's sort of building into that simplicity model that they're trying to instrument around the whole, people getting familiar with the cloud journey and how easy it can be, and the on-prem can be, in a similar vein, really.
I think from a lifecycle management, obviously, it's time for people to be embracing that. I really like the idea of parallel updates, and I go back to my time as being a consultant building brand new vSphere clusters. Got no workloads on them, so the need for I've only got M+1 didn't really matter. I just needed to get them updated as quickly as possible. So certainly there are scenarios people are going to have to consider how their hosts are configured, whether it's M+1, M+2. If using vSAN, obviously that adds further complexity to it as well. But certainly good to have the options available to allow people to handle it in different ways.
Yeah, I think that the other bit to take into tandem with that as well is the fact that they've always had the concept of hardware profiles to sort of standardize the builds in terms of what you do within your VMware environment, but they're now going along this, I think they're called configuration profiles. It's a new feature of version 8, and I think the sort of that product being introduced is more related to the acquisition of Salt, where they're trying to sort of prevent that configuration drift as well in the ESXi environment. So once it's built, it always looks the same, and if there are issues, they'll be remediated more or less without anyone really knowing that those issues are there, because it's put it back to the correct state. So it's good to see that being introduced in the lifecycle management piece as well, from a VMware point of view.
So there's a plethora of other updates available. I think is there changes to the DRS engine and the ability for data processing units to be taken into consideration with DRS as well. So that's getting more intelligent over time. They're promising more performance than ever before, which I think is what it is. I'd imagine. I haven't looked, and Cam, you probably know the answer to this. The monster VM is probably now bigger than it ever has been before. I don't know who actually deploys these things in production.
Yeah, you've put me on the spot there. I don't know the exact numbers, but certainly they've upped the level again in terms of the red line, in terms of what you can run. The DRS has improved in version 8 again, and I think they've sort of improved it around the persistent memory setting within VMware specifically. But again, it's coming down to you've got a resource there. We're handling the CPU bit potentially with the DPU offload, but also from a memory perspective, we want to make sure that's working as efficiently as possible, because typically you're never CPU bound. It's in terms of your day-to-day running without the peak. It's the memory that normally catches you out. So wherever DRS can be smarter about managing the resources in the cluster that you have, the better for you in terms of the utilization of the environment before you have to reach into your wallet and effectively go and buy some more memory.
Definitely. John, I don't know if you've looked at the TPM options. Obviously, Windows 11 has quite a requirement on TPM, and lots of VMware environments are utilized to run desktop OSs, aren't they?
So yeah, they've brought in a virtual TPM for Windows 11 deployment on scale. It's something that needed to come in because they weren't really supporting it. So that's been brought in now. The exact requirements I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's something that it had to come in, basically. It allows them to effectively do it on a allow you to have a template to bring it in without any, so it's not going to affect BitLocker on that side of it as well.
I think one of the problems was if you cloned a VM with a virtual TPM, you ended up then with a security risk because you had two machines with the same TPM in them effectively.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. The same thing, Barry.
So Kam, vSAN 8 has had a number of changes in it. Are you able to summarize those changes and what they mean to customers?
Yeah, so vSAN 8 has introduced something called ESA, and it's basically building on what was there before called OSA. And the reasons behind the traditional architecture where OSA was used was for having that was because from a capacity, from a disk point of view, when you built vSAN, you obviously had the concept of a capacity and also performance tier, and basically everything would hit the performance before it then went down to the capacity tier. And the idea was there really to use the more expensive disk for that sort of acceleration piece, and then destaging it onto the cheaper disk once the operations had completed. But this was based on a model from many years ago in terms of when spinning disks were very popular and SSDs and things like that were very expensive. And the world has really moved on from there now to the point where now we have NVMe and things like this. So the actual dial has changed in terms of the performance capabilities and the infrastructure. And that's how ESA came to be in terms of version 8. The idea being that effectively the front end to it in terms of the logging of the data part is as quick as it's going to be with the RAID 1 part, and then the destaging in terms of putting it onto the capacity element of it, if you want to call it that, is on RAID 5 or RAID 6. So it's giving you that better performance. And also what they've done within the ESA model is try to compress the data at a much earlier stage of data being ingested, so that you're not, again, consuming CPU cycles in terms of trying to create the compression. So also that means that when the data is compressed ahead of being written to disk, it means there's less data to transfer between the nodes in terms of the storage layer. ESA has also introduced the concept really of trying to stripe that data across it cluster wide, again for performance reasons. So you can see, if you compress it at the front end, make it small as you can in terms of the data payload, and then from a writing point of view, it means that there's less to write in terms of the back end between the nodes to stripe that data. The one thing I would say is, they have moved the dial in terms of the performance and the disk types there. But I think John mentioned earlier to myself in a conversation that NVMe is now the entry point for the ESA option.
Yeah.
So it's something to be mindful of if you are going down that route. OSA in terms of the traditional model is still supported, so that's not going away. But you now have a choice when you go to deploy it from a sort of customer perspective.
Yeah, they very much said it's an optional format in terms of that, the traditional is still going to be supported for a long time. I say traditional, the existing is still going to be supported for a very long time. That's not going away. That's there to support the hybrid and sort of the variety of spinning disks available out there and the way it's set up. So it's very much focused on the higher end and NVMe setups to really take advantage of that technology coming through and create the scalable platform they want with that side of it.
I can't let this conversation happen between myself and John without mentioning the word heritage. So John and I affectionately refer to the old world or legacy, if you want to call it that, as heritage. And I feel like we should have the
heritage platform.
Yeah, tweed coats and hats on whilst we talk about it. But these things are very much part of our data center makeup, and we need to make sure that we have that coexistence model there. And yes, they've introduced the ESA bit, and yes, it's much faster, but it's not. You don't have to turn it on. You have that option, because as well as the sort of disk types changing in terms of supported models, there's now an expectation for going down the ESA route that you have a 25 gig backplane from a storage perspective. And given the situation we have at the moment in terms of getting hold of switches, you don't want to go and turn it on and get or think, where are my 25 gig switches now? So it's a consideration, certainly, going forward. But it's nice to see that they've given you the flexibility now to leverage the power of these new hardware devices from a storage perspective and not be locked in at an earlier generation of storage performance?
I think it's there's probably very few technologies out there that unite so many customers. I suppose Windows Server is the other example, but you could be talking to a customer that might be 30, 40 employees running a small two-node cluster to support their office, and exactly the same technology is supporting the hyperscalers rolling out hybrid cloud VMware solutions to thousands of customers from that side. So I think it's important that vSAN has different configuration options that allow more performance, more resiliency and things like that, and give you those options, because certainly at the hyperscaler side of things, from what I understand it, vSAN is the de facto standard that they're using when VMware is being deployed by AWS or the VMware Azure VMware solution, or GCP or Oracle or whatever. They are using that vCloud foundation kind of grouping of hardware. Sorry, John, you had something to say there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we got, there is that consideration that has to be taken into account, that providing an NVMe option isn't necessarily the right solution for everybody, purely from a price perspective. The NVMe disks are still expensive. They're not at the same sort of scale that spinning disk or even traditional SSDs are still at the price point. And since this actually does require the NVMe and 25 gigs to sort of run in the background, so they need that low latency, then there is still going to be that level of finance included that has to really need and actually warrant having that kind of solution.
I mean, I certainly know of customers that we've worked with for a long time that are probably running exactly the same workloads that they were 10, 15 years ago when I was speccing them at 8-disk SATA-based SAN to run their workloads. They simply don't have the need for that NVMe, but to be honest with you, they don't want the spinning rust anymore, and having a solution that is either hybrid or based on affordable SSDs will more than meet their needs. But it's about having that choice and flexibility.
I think one little thing we haven't mentioned regarding to the sort of underlying technology is that they've had to sort of work on how they're going to do this in the first place, and there is actually sort of a log file structure system or file system in the background there that's sort of helping to optimize and create all the way this works. I think it's going to be interesting to see how robust that is. I mean, I'm guessing they've tested it pretty heavily before they've released this structure. I think we'll have to just see if that has any effects on anything else around as well.
I don't know, Cam, if you want to reflect on the new release structure for vSphere 8, because they've made quite a big thing about the change and what that means to customers, haven't they?
That's right. They're now saying a bit, I'm trying to think, Victor Kiam, so good I bought the product type thing. But the all Ron seal in terms of it does what it says on the tin is probably the more appropriate one. But effectively, they're so confident now in the release cycle that everyone's got used to the term of GA, general availability, and anything before that you wouldn't touch with a barge pole because you'll be really worried about affecting your production workloads. So VMware now have what's called IA, which I think is immediate availability. No, is it? Yeah, immediate availability, I think it is, which basically means that it's good enough for production workloads, and you can run it, and you will have no defects as such with it. But as soon as they've reached a certain cadence in terms of the amount of people using the product, which is they're saying about 4 to 6 weeks, then the product will go into the standard GA program. So it's quite good in the way that they're sort of saying, well, we're so confident that what we're releasing it's stable from the beginning that we'll give you an IA, so you're not having to wait for a GA in terms of enough beta testing by customers to say, yeah, this is good enough to go GA. So it's nice to see that sort of situation. So if you really want to be at the cutting edge, you've got that opportunity to really be there at the front.
I think it's important. I can't remember, was it the initial releases of vSphere 7? There was a bit of a stumbling block, or was it one of the updates to vSphere? I think, John, you remember it quite well.
Yeah, they actually had to roll it back in the end, didn't they? So it was messy, I think the phrase would be. So yeah, hopefully this one, now they've tested this one pretty, and they did sort of state at the time this wouldn't happen again. So I think this is a clear statement now that they're releasing stuff. It's ready for production. It's ready to be used. You don't have to sit there and wait for additional versions to be released before it's ready out there for you.
And there was obviously lots of other features and functionality included in this. We don't tend to go into the containers world that much in our day-to-day, but obviously VMware Tanzu is a very big focus now for VMware, and there's a raft of new features when it comes to Kubernetes and Tanzu and container management in this release. The other thing that I noted on attending some of the sessions was the vSphere Plus functionality, where they're giving you effectively a hybrid management console to manage all versions of vSphere, irrespective of where they are. So maybe I can put some links down into the show notes below that kind of talks about that functionality a little bit more. But I don't know, Cam, if there were any other kind of standout features or anything really else about vSphere 8 that kind of is worthy to talk about.
I think that's covered most of the points. I mean, the thing to bear in mind is that vSphere 8 is a thing now, and not vSphere, vSphere 8, and so therefore, from the point of view of planning for the future, it's just making sure that any investment decisions or decisions you're making around the virtualized strategy take benefit really of the vSphere 8 bit, knowing that they're sort of going down that sort of cloud route in terms of integration and the hybrid mode of operation. They're very much at that forefront in terms of trying to make sure they're relevant, shall we say, from that perspective, because of course with the recent, or I should say pending acquisition, because it's not really cleared everything by Broadcom, there's a lot of sort of uncertainty about where the direction that VMware is going in and whether they're going to have the R&D dollars there to really invest in the product. And I think the vSphere 8 shows that they're still in the game, they're still making the investment in terms of the product, and it still has a relevance in terms of the hybrid world that we live in at the moment. There are some other announcements, I think, around the sort of life cycle stuff which which have come in, but I think we've covered most of the important parts of that enhancement.
So, John, maybe you can take us on to why should people upgrade to this? So lots of our customers are mid-market customers. Hopefully they've enjoyed hearing a little bit about some of the features that will be coming, and certainly some of those features like lifecycle management, maybe the vSAN updates, and general improvements will be of interest to them. But many customers will be thinking, I'm not sure that most of these features are for me. So why should people be considering this upgrade to vSphere 8?
Well, we've all seen now that vSphere 6, 6.5 and 6.7 are now end of life. We should be already looking to the fact that they should be moved away from that and actually be onto 7. vSphere 7 will be around for quite a while yet, and it's currently end of lifing, listed at roughly around about 2027. So that's not really a major worry. In terms of the background, though, security updates. There's always that. It's the taking advantage of the current hardware. You want to be on sort of the version that they're currently sort of releasing as such. It's where you should be on your hardware. This is an incremental increase in an update, but I think it's still worthy of installing and getting up onto that environment.
I think obviously people pay for their support and subscription for a reason, to get the latest support, to get the latest products and features, and I think this is a natural progression that if you just stay up to date with it, you don't end up with that shock at some point later. So I think it is important to upgrade, and I think whilst vSphere 7 is still supported, and as you mentioned, will be supported until 2027, the amount of times that I've been in a support ticket and the engineer goes, "Oh, I think this problem has been fixed in vSphere 8, or probably back in my day in vSphere 5 or vSphere 4 or whatever it would have been back in my time." But it often comes up when there is a problem where there isn't an obvious fix, and whether it is VMware or whether it is the storage manufacturer, whether that's Dell or NetApp or whatever, you often get into that point where there is a latest and greatest release that the vendors concentrate on that release, and I always go, well, we do support this release, but we think this problem has been fixed, so maybe try the upgrade and then come back to us. And that's not really a situation you want to be in reactively. You really want to be planning that proactively, I think.
There is sorry. There is a concern about the fact that we do need to make sure that the hardware compatibility list is actually sort of supporting the hardware for vSphere 8 as well. For example, the Dell servers now, their 14th gen are supporting vSphere 8, 13th gen are not. So that's the sort of example, the R630s, anything with a 3.0 in the servers, they're no longer supporting.
Right.
they're also depreciating stuff like the Dell Compellent and Ecologic now depreciating support and are only going up to version 7 only. So there is that consideration as well. But all the current generation servers have already been confirmed, and SANs have all been confirmed, and same for HP as well, where you've got sort of the Gen 9s are no longer compatible with vSphere 8 and are sort of being depreciated off those lists for the moment anyway. There may be some firmware that comes out down the line, but for the moment, they're off the list.
I think the thing, like I mentioned a bit earlier, is all the R&D dollars. We look at tech companies right now, and people are cutting workforces and refocusing efforts in terms of the development on only the things that are core to the company whilst times are tight. And I think they'll be focusing a lot of their effort into 8 and releasing updates into version 8. And whilst they'll still maintain 7, I think the cadence of updates and all changes will be less. It'll be more about support and stability and that product set going forward, because they'll want to get that version 8 product, really fully evolved and with all the latest and greatest features that that they can embrace, because it's built into the architecture of the product, whereas it may not be natively there in version 7. So I think, whilst it's not something right now that needs to be, let's go and do it, certainly planning in the next year or years, certainly it's a consideration, from, am I buying the right hardware? Have I got the right licensing? Do I take S&S out on, as in support and subscription on the product, and all those sorts of things? Just making sure you're prepared for that journey. It's sort of like an insurance policy, just making sure you're ready, for that situation when it does arise. And we know, some companies will adopt the approach as in the support is going to end maybe earlier than 2027, and you don't want to be in a position where you've got to react very quickly. So we've seen, with the 6.5 and 6.7 with vSphere, it's quite a little time between the two products before it eventually became sunsetted in October of this year. So to be honest, give yourself enough runway to be ready for that journey when you are ready to make it.
I think, as John's already mentioned, there's a number of considerations when you do that upgrade. And John, you mentioned the hardware compatibility list and seeing what is compatible and what isn't. I'm sure I still know some customers that have got R720s and R620s running in production, if not even 610s and 710s. But that seems like a very long time ago now. Although I think I did hear a customer yesterday that was running 17-year-old hardware still in production. So maybe now is the time to refresh that. And I think we're coming to the kind of, when we start talking about VMware Explore, why people maybe haven't upgraded, this cloud first mentality that maybe hasn't served people well. But there are a number of other considerations, I think, when looking to upgrade your vSphere environment. And off the top of my head, you've got supporting software and guest operating systems. So checking to make sure your guest operating systems are supported. Is your Windows NT server still supported on the latest version? Hopefully no one is still running that, although I think I do know a few customers that probably are trying to run it there. It's things like your backup. So Veeam, is Veeam fully supporting it? If you're using some other backup technology, is it fully supporting of vSphere 8? Another one that I find customers get caught by quite often is the fact that they have designed their VMware environment for N+1. But then there's been a requirement to roll out a new virtual machine, and they haven't had additional budget. So unfortunately, the HA settings have been tweaked, and they're no longer running in an N+1 environment. And the first time they find that out is when they try and put something in maintenance mode to do the update in the middle of the working day, and they end up with challenges around that. So I think this does need to be carefully planned, that upgrade. My recommendation would be to kind of start looking at that at the beginning of next year. Obviously, we've heard it's gone through the IA and GA process. Let's make sure that we're getting those environments upgraded, but let's plan that meticulously. I don't know, Kam, if there's anything else from a consideration perspective that you would urge people to look at before undertaking the upgrade?
I think what you mentioned covers the bases. I think it's about using common sense in terms of trying to plan far enough ahead to make sure you're not having to react to it, a bit like the 6.5 to 6.7 situation, or the 6.7 to 7, I should say, actually. So from that perspective, it's just about making sure that you're taking into consideration all the required steps necessary. And I think some of the stuff that John mentioned around, don't think don't rush into it gung-ho thinking you're going to go version 8 when you get, actually my hardware won't support it in terms of the server stuff, or my storage might not be able to do it because it's not being, having support for vSphere 8. So you have to, as tedious as it is, you have to go through all those compatibility matrices to sort of work out, exactly where your journey will take you. And sometimes, you have to, if you know that you want to go to 8, but you can't physically get there because of the age of the equipment, of course, budgets need to be predetermined and set and, gained before you can actually go down that road. So certainly investing some time to understand if 8 is a thing for you, which direction you want to go in, then and making sure the sort of ducks are lined up in terms of before you go down that road.
I think you're right with that one. I mean, the upgrade from 6.7 to 7 seemed to sneak up on an awful lot of companies, and I think there was a lot of people left it a little bit too late. And when it did come, it's like, oh, we've got to do it now, and you don't always get the best decisions then. I think you don't necessarily get the right analysis of your own environment and your own platform to make sure that A, is it compatible? B, is it the right thing to do actually to upgrade things? And what are the actual other components you need to upgrade, like operating systems in the background? And does that actually mean you need to change your software on that you're using on that server? And do you want to change that software on that server? And it creates wider considerations. I mean, this to me, vSphere 7 to 8 feels more like an upgrade from Windows 10 to 11, where it's one of the ones that you upgrade. You don't necessarily need to rush out and do it, but if you look back after a year or two, you'd be like, oh yeah, okay, that was actually a worthy upgrade, and that was the right thing to do at the time. But there's no need to. You don't need to rush it, but be considered. I think is definitely the right phrase.
I think one of the things that is important whenever you look at it is VMware do a matrix of support. So it's likely you may be running more than one product from VMware. Certainly you'd be running vCenter and ESXi inside your vSphere environment. But what you will want to look at is maybe those other supported components like VMware Horizon, VROPS, VRA, VRO, and any of those kind of tools that you might be utilizing. Where are they now? What needs to be upgraded first is always a good question, because quite often when we get to a customer site, you find that there's an old version of something like VMware SRM that is running and doing something that you've not used for a while. You've almost forgot that it's running there because you've not had a DR event, you've not used it. Please make sure you're testing your DR on a regular basis, by the way. But from that basis, you kind of forget what you've got. So you kind of need to kind of fully draw out what is involved with your VMware environment, what integrates with it, and then meticulously plan what you upgrade first. And I think, Cam, as you mentioned there, from a storage perspective, there's quite often storage drivers or firmware on the SAN that might need to be changed. So actually, you might need to do the SAN firmware first, because the SAN firmware will support both vSphere 7 and vSphere 8, but vSphere 8 will only work with the latest version of the SAN firmware, or certainly will only be supported by the latest version of the SAN firmware. So it is like one of those puzzles where you've got to move everything around, and you've got one little square that you can get this all right with. So it has got to be planned, it has got to be considered.
Yeah, I think John and I were having a conversation earlier on, just a customer going, okay, we're going through all the matrices now to work out if it'll work. And it's just, you're trying to work out the sort of all the cogs involved, and things like the RAID adapters, or even the storage firmware in terms of the SAN switches, the processors. And it's not an insignificant task sometimes, especially if your estate is quite elderly and you want to sort of embrace change. You want to make sure that you're not doing it and then trying to sort of firefight in terms of all the issues you may have.
It's definitely not a situation where you just want to go, right, okay, let's just go for it, install it, and see what happens, because you will come a cropper 9 times out of 10. I mean, hopefully you get lucky, but do the diligence first.
Let's switch this up a bit then. So the other part of the podcast that we want to be talking about is VMware Explore, the rebranded VMworld conference. Took place, I think, in San Francisco and Barcelona. So for this section, we're also going to welcome Megan Warren onto the podcast. Hello, Megan.
Hello.
So we've welcomed Megan because alongside myself, Megan also attended one of the VMware Explore conferences. So let's get kick-started with you then, Megan. Obviously, you've been to a number of previous VMworld conferences. What were your thoughts around VMware Explore, and what were the key messages that you heard?
So I think first thought is one, it's great to get back to those live events, and I think you could tell everyone was just happy to be back, whether that was to meet people in the community, to be back to learn more about the technology. There was just such a great buzz about the event that everyone was just happy to be there. I felt like the event was slightly smaller. Obviously, one of the key things was that they only did one general session at VMworld and two general sessions at VMworld, one general session at VMware Explore, which made it feel like they were trying to compact everything that they usually do over like 3 hours into a 1.5 hour session. So it moved quite quickly. But I think the key message that I heard throughout the whole event, whether that was the general session or the sort of sub sessions that you go to throughout the event, was around that cloud smart. I was about to say cloud first and I had to stop myself. The cloud smart approach rather than a cloud first approach, so that everyone says that they're in a cloud first approach, but don't actually know what that means, and they're not getting what they need quick enough out of that approach. Actually, cloud smart do the right stuff at the right time rather than just trying to throw everything into the cloud straight away. So I think that was the overarching message, and then you obviously had a lot that then went into it from VMware and supporting partners.
I was surprised to see actually how busy it was. I kind of thought post-COVID, I wonder how many people are willing to travel, especially the Barcelona event heading into sort of autumn here over in Europe, people being maybe a little bit more concerned around COVID, but it was a busy event. It was packed. The physical space was a little bit smaller than it had been. It had kind of gone back 2-3 years in terms of the space that they were using at the conference centre. Much like you, Megan, the kind of discussion around cloud smart really resonated to me, but possibly for different reasons than that VMware were talking about. So VMware talking about this cloud first approach meant that many customers were trying to refactor workloads into native cloud services, and this was taking far too long, leading to cloud chaos, effectively things not happening quick enough, things happening kind of on the fly. So them encouraging this cloud smart approach, which was maybe you just want to move some workloads to the cloud, and that was okay, utilizing the VMware on platform, so VMware on AWS or the VMware Azure solution for VMware, whatever the right way of those words is. I completely agree with that, but I also see some customers that have kind of gone for this cloud first approach, but they've not really considered what that means and what the steps are to get there, and actually how this really works. And what that's actually meant is they no longer have been looking at their virtual environment whilst it's still running some of their biggest production workloads. They've moved to maybe Microsoft 365 because that supported the statement of cloud first. We're not doing Exchange anymore, we're going into the cloud. They maybe have dabbled and put some stuff in Azure, but they're then kind of at this point of not knowing where to carry on from that perspective. So maybe before kind of we share any additional thoughts about what happened on the show floor, I don't know, Kam, what's your kind of thoughts on this kind of cloud first, cloud chaos, cloud smart, being in the cloud kind of messaging from VMware?
No, I was going to say, actually, from a VMware Explore point of view, it's the first time that actually Sanjay's not been on the keyboard playing his tunes, so it was quite a departure from VMworlds of old. But yeah, I mean, from a cloud smart point of view, it's a common sense statement in one way, because a lot of people have been sort of enticed by doing things in the cloud and how simple things are to do. You just literally sign up for a subscription and away you go. But I think quite quickly they realize, oh my goodness, it's more complex than you think it might be to begin with. And actually, you do need to take those baby steps in terms of making sure that you've got all the guardrails in place before you start embarking on that sort of cloud journey, because there's a lot of things to consider, because we've been, for 20 or 30 years, maybe, working in one mindset around how we do workloads. We've used to it in our own premises and doing stuff. And now we've got to get used to the concept, well, I don't own that bit anymore, but I still have to make it just as secure as if it was in my own building. So all that mindset has to change, and we as human beings need to evolve to sort of be able to support that paradigm. And I think we're still on that journey. And so we have to take it not, steady, or engage with partners to make sure that, we're doing it in a way that we're not exposing ourselves, and, especially with the whole cyber crime situation we find ourselves in now, where it's become probably one of the most popular crimes now, if you want to call it popular, in terms of the day-to-day living, that we need just to make sure that we're not being putting ourselves in a position of vulnerability just for the sake of liberating something from a data center. So careful planning and careful steps, trying to get the guardrails in place is very important. So that whole cloud smart, using it for the right reasons is exactly the right sentiment. Cloud can do everything, but it doesn't mean it's the answer to everything. So you need to make sure you're smart, I suppose, in some of your decisions and what you're placing where.
I think maybe the word's prolific rather than popular in terms of these crimes. But no, I completely agree with you, Cam. I think it needs to come down, and as it always should have done. I mean, the cloud is just another location, and this really comes down to your business, what your business needs, what you're trying to achieve as a business, where are your skills? Are you more CapEx or OpEx aligned in terms of your spending patterns? What more can you achieve by moving to the cloud? Because we all know that there are workloads and cloud native tools that may be available to you by moving the workload there. But if you're not planning on leveraging those, or don't have the skill set or the desire to do something with that, that's when you start to question it. And I think we're in the position where we can support either from our skill set and our customers. We have customers that still have an on-premises technology strategy, and that works for them. I don't think we've got anyone left that is completely 100% on premises. Everyone is hybrid. This is what we're being told is happening, and that's what we see happening. But equally, we have customers that are 100% in the cloud and leveraging most of those examples. They're leveraging both Azure and AWS. So maybe the hybrid cloud and multi-cloud is real, but I think VMware's point of actually going, let's just stop with this cloud first nonsense and let's just be smart about it is probably one. I don't know, John, if you've got any thoughts around sort of this sentiment.
I think it's probably right, to be honest. There is an awful lot of, as they state, cloud chaos out there. Basically, a lot of people are just not quite sure. They think they should be doing this, and therefore they're doing it because they should be doing it. Just a bit more of an intelligent sort of look at what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think, cloud smart is definitely sort of the route forward.
Megan, what else outside of that kind of cloud smart, cloud chaos, cloud first messaging, what kind of sessions stood out to you, or what stood out to you on the exhibition floor?
So I think what was, I may be reading too much into this, but what felt like a bit of a statement was the fact that on the sort of expo floor, where you do the hall crawl and all of that, you had some bigger stands of things like AWS, Microsoft, and Google. They all had quite large stands, which before sort of a lot of this technology, they would have been seen as almost VMware's, I don't want to say enemies, but almost competition. So the fact that they had them on the floor was good to see that, and good to see that they're embracing that and see those partnerships. And equally, I went to the Microsoft keynote as well at VMware Explore, which again, probably reading too much into it, but it was at 9 a.m. on the Wednesday when the general session would have been. So to have a keynote by Microsoft at that time, I felt like was quite a big statement around their partnership as well. So it was good to see things about Azure on there, talking about VMware solution on Azure, about Azure Arc and those technologies as well, and how VMware are working with them. So that was good to see that. The only thing I'd probably say that was negative about it was at the VMware Explore party, there was no one walking around with magnums. I was really looking forward to a magnum at the party, and they weren't there, and I was very disappointed by that. So everything else was great, just I really missed the magnums.
So to summarize, VMware Explorer has gone downhill in comparison to VMware because there was no ice cream for you.
Slightly has gone downhill because of that. Yeah, I'm going to be honest, and I'm not sure if anyone will back me up on that, but it's one of the memories I have, and I was disappointed that that was something that VMworld was taking with it.
Someone in the, I was going to say, VMware feedback office going, there's someone complaining we didn't have magnums.
It's me. 100%.
We know it, isn't there?
Times have changed. So, John, Cam, I think that's a good point in terms of this Microsoft relationship. Very much, you wouldn't have seen Microsoft there. I think you probably saw them there in 2019, but they weren't there in 2018 and before that. What are your thoughts with VMware now being the friends of everyone, and specifically for us, a Microsoft and VMware partner, that Microsoft relationship?
I think from the perspective of, I guess, creating that frictionless management, shall we say, we know that there's no competition here really, and who's better than the other one. It's more about, well, how can we work together better? to deliver better value for our customers, because at the end of the day, customers are becoming more savvy about that. Well, you've locked me into something that I can't move away from, and they don't want that anymore. So I think certainly VMware have recognized that they need to be almost a Swiss Army knife and almost like a transportation layer to say, well, you want your workload here on-prem, fine. You want it in this cloud over here, fine. So they're giving that freedom of movement and flexibility, which is what enterprises demand in this day and age. So embracing it and sort of leveraging the best of the capabilities out of each other is really a good step forward, I think, going forward. And we're seeing it in terms of some of the integration pieces around storage, for example, that it used to be, well, you can use our compute but no one else's storage, for example, but now it's like we don't really mind whose you use so long as you follow our API way of doing it. So it's really refreshing to see. And going back to sort of that point that Megan just made around the fact that the hyperscaler partners seem to be having an ever-present presence in these sorts of solution expos is good, because there's a story to tell across both verticals in terms of the on-premise bit and also the cloud, and showing that sort of willingness and ability to work together is quite important, from a planning and strategy point of view.
Yeah,
John,
from the
any thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say it's almost some recognition that basically they're treating the scalers as the new hardware, effectively, from a VMware point of view. Before it would have been HP, Dell, Lenovo, whoever. Now they're treating like AWS, Azure as that hardware, effectively. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't really matter. If they can create that frictionless multi-cloud atmosphere and management consoles in some degree, then yeah, why not?
I think,
Yeah, I think
one of the
sorry.
points is all about simplification, isn't it? I mean, the main thing I want to reflect upon is sort of 5-6 years ago, everything was in your VMware environment. Maybe you had to ask the question about which cluster is it in, which vCenter is managing it, or something like that. But the answer was the workload is in VMware somewhere for the majority of workloads. I think now it's which cloud is it in, which subscription is it in, which tool are we using to back it up, which tool are we using to monitor it. So I think VMware do have a place here to unify the multi-cloud and bring those into there, but I think there are also opportunities for other products such as backup. Let's make sure that when you're not using 5 different backup tools, let's make sure we're not using 5 different monitoring tools. We've got to be able to bring these together to simplify them, to allow you to consume them as if they were different hardware vendors. I like that analogy there, John, but we've equally got to be able to bring them together.
And I think that leads on to sort of ARIA in terms of the product that VMware announced as well. That the ARIA framework is effectively the all-seeing eye, single control plane in terms of being able to see what's going on across your estate, really, in terms of not only just the traditional nuts and bolts of infrastructure, but also down to that deep infrastructure level and application level, to understand what's going on where and how you can optimize things, or how you can validate if things are in compliance or not, or where you may, the topology in terms of the device mapping and that sort of thing. So they're introducing all of that concept, which you may not just get natively out of one hyperscaler. So I think, they've recognized that with the hybrid model, VMware is still the predominant hypervisor of choice in the data center versus Hyper-V, but, it gives you that flexibility of seeing your assets on-prem or in the cloud and managing them almost as a single entity from that perspective. So, ARIA is great in terms of building on what was, I guess, VROPs and things like that, but now it's moved up a gear in terms of its capabilities. And certainly, from the ARIA point of view, they're sort of introducing this free tier model where you can go and test drive it against 2 clouds of your choice and see what value it can glean, shall we say, from a high level before you make any significant investment.
I think, it was the coming together of VROPS and Cloud Health, wasn't it? I think then bundled up as ARIA. It's a word I really don't know how to pronounce. I need to listen to Joe Bagley or someone saying it, or just listen to Kam, because he's probably done that for me. But yeah, no, I think that's certainly good to see. I believe it seems to have more of a software as a service style approach to it, which I think is what VMware need for a bit of their tooling. I think people are now expecting that rather than expecting to have to deploy quite large OVAs or appliances or certainly servers to do those things as you used to have to do with VROPS probably a number of versions ago now. So maybe we'll do a final round the room around VMware Explore, VMware strategy, maybe things you're interested to see. So Megan, is there anything else? What's the best of the rest that you noticed from VMware Explore?
I mean, the other thing that it was just the community, the fact that I bumped into so many familiar faces that either I've met before or that I've met virtually but haven't actually met in person over the last 2 years, etc. So it was great to have that community back where, I mean, the VMware community has always been happy to share, and they really are a full community, aren't they, where everyone's friends even if you don't know them. So that was really nice to get back to that and bump into some familiar faces.
Kam, in terms of messaging and things like that from VMware Explore?
Yeah, I think it was nice, reflecting what Megan just said there, for the tribe to be back together. For VMware to be trying to remind people that there is a relevance for the VMware bit, even though the cloud conversations are there. But it's not VMware or them; it's VMware and us, really, in terms of making sure that you're not feeling like you're pigeonholed into one particular technology provider in terms of just the VMware bit. So it was good to see that they're sort of opening their doors and saying all things to all people, and we want to work together to create that ecosystem that is smart in how it functions. So it was nice to see, and the future years, it'd be interesting to see how that relationship works with Broadcom. So it is nice to see that they're still investing the sort of money, and that there's been no let up in that in terms of the product.
John?
I think for me, it's very much just interest to see where they go in the future. I think it's they're clearly still innovating. We saw that with vSphere, with the vSAN 8 release this year, I think. And I think it'd be interesting to see where they take some of this technology, the DPU stuff that's coming out, and we'll see where it goes next. I think it's they're still clearly investing in the platforms and within the company, and yeah, just want to see kind of what they do with it. It's gonna be good.
I think for me, VMware has always been an abstraction layer. And back in the day when we all got involved with it, it was an abstraction over hardware. So you don't worry about your hardware so much anymore. Your VMs can run anywhere. And I think the message is now very much the same with the public cloud and on-premises technology. Don't worry about where it's running. You can still do that with VMware. That message, I think, only goes so far. And that's why things like Araya, I think, is so important, because whilst they maybe can't abstract you from some of the cloud native services, maybe they can help you see the insight into where else it could run, how much it's going to cost you, what are the ways to be able to optimize that. So I think there's got to be a change of approach there slightly. The other side is the EUC side of things, which I think was a little bit damped down of where it has been previously. There was talk about obviously the ability to run Horizon Cloud and put that on top of AVD and things like that. There was also some speaking about Workspace ONE and the features and functionalities, and I think I did a doodle on all of that kind of stuff. But for me, I'm not really sure where I'm seeing the future of VMware's EUC strategy. I see lots of customers heavy into Intune, AVD, those native services now. Undoubtedly, big enterprises are probably still buying into the additional levels of control that a VMware-led solution might be able to give you. But maybe that's an area where coming together with Microsoft a little bit more and maybe offering different levels of service that aren't just a big wraparound, but they're more extensibility of those tools might come. But we'll see what happens when the acquisition finishes. There's too many rumors to talk about, but there's also a huge group of great people at VMware that I think certainly we wish them all the best of luck as that acquisition completes and the new journey for VMware starts. But very positive messages were mentioned at VMware Explore with the leaders on stage and things like that about that acquisition. And there seems to be a promise from Broadcom that VMware, they bought them because they're so good and they're doing what they're doing, and there doesn't seem to be the messaging that I think there was previously there with Symantec, and maybe how that didn't go quite so well in the past. But thank you ever so much to all of you for joining me on this podcast. Hopefully the listeners have found this useful. Don't forget, you can find this podcast in your favorite podcast app. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Please give us a comment what you'd like to hear about in the future, or what are your thoughts about the latest version of vSphere, vSphere 8 or VMware Explore. But you can also watch this podcast back on YouTube. So please do the same, like and subscribe, and make sure that you check it out from that perspective. Following this podcast, I'll make sure that myself, John and Cam give you some good links that can be shared in the show notes, so you can read more about VMware Explore and also vSphere 8. And make sure you check out the next episode of the podcast, where we'll be delving into more of probably the hybrid cloud world, maybe talking about things like DR as a service, and also we've got to do that annual thing of predicting what's going to come next. I don't know how relevant that is in this cloud age that we are now, but why not? It's always fun to think about where technologies can go next. So thank you ever so much for listening to the Define Tomorrow podcast, and we look forward to recording the next one soon, and or hopefully reaching out and speaking to some of you as well.